have to kick you out of the house. We came to this country from communist Poland. Now we're here and what are you doing? How did I respond? Well, I was like, oh, I don't know, Mom. It's okay, I get it. And I waited 3 months, and then I said, hey, I have this documentary here, and I don't know what to think of it. I'm really young, and you're so much wiser, and you're so much smarter, and you're so much educated than I am. And, I want you to watch this and to tell me what you think about this. And then, of course, I gave them loose change. They popped in, they watched it. Their minds were blown. They were like, Building 7, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And I'm like, okay, play the credits. And then my name was in the credits. And they're like, you son of a gun. And then, bam, automatically now they're just fearful that I'm going to die any day because of the crazy stuff I do. But at least they're on my side. They're helpful, and they're part of the journey with me now. And that's the approach we should all have. Sorry for ranting too long. Go ahead.
That was great. So I think that what we're seeing at the moment, and maybe you'll disagree with me, I'm not sure, but I think we're in the death throes of traditional media. We're really seeing cable die. We're seeing that government-sponsored television network model die. I'm a producer for John Stossel, and even he left cable to start an internet show because he realized that this is the future. This is how you reach new audiences. So looking at that model, I mean, traditionally we have seen mainstream media being a mouthpiece for the state, and this operates in a couple of different ways because there are different incentive structures at play. One of them is that literally you're given an outline, a schedule that says these are the talking points we want you to cover. We are going to spoon feed you that information if you would like. So on the one hand, you've got journalists in a very high-paced field saying we got a deadline in 30 minutes and we've got this information hand-fed to us. Do we want to take that or go and do our own research and put something? So on the one side of things, you've got something that's very easy just to regurgitate. And on the other side of things, you actually lose access as a journalist if you don't follow the guidelines outlined by the White House. And you are seeing that starting to get mixed up because mainstream media has a lot of power. You have people on this stage who get a hell of a lot more views than people on Fox get right now. So it's quite inspiring to see people in independent media take away that stronghold that traditional media has had for so long. And that being said, I don't think that we have lost media being the mouthpiece of the state, though, because I'm seeing a lot of what seem like very orchestrated outrage campaigns. Suddenly 50 bloggers at the same time will start talking about one issue, and you're like, this stuff's been happening for forever. Why did they all just suddenly decide to talk about this one issue? It's all very convenient. So I wanted to ask you guys what your thoughts were on, media being perhaps a vehicle, like a state apparatus tool for power or for getting their narrative out. Do you think that's what we're going to see in the future? How is that changing, and how's that actually affecting what you guys do?
Well, I think it's really interesting because you're talking about how, something will originate or there are talking points. And I've always wondered, and I don't have the answer, but I've always wondered how many of these journalists and these companies that are perpetuating these narratives, how many are taking orders and they're just doing what they're told, and how many really believe it and they really agree with it and they're expressing this outrage because they're just as programmed into the system as the people whose minds we're trying to change. So that's just something to think about. I don't know the answer. But if you look at the history of the influence of government on media, it's very clear. The CIA was doing this in the 50s. I'm not, this isn't just crackpot stuff. This is very well documented. Even the CIA has admitted it. I think I'd have to fact check that one for sure. They admit a lot of stuff. I'm not sure if they've admitted that one. But if they did, it's like, oh, we don't do that anymore. But who am I to say if they do or they don't? But
we literally get schedules from the White House of their talking points. So it's not even
exactly.
covert.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're not telling their audiences that. There's no disclaimer like, hey, we were told to say this and to talk about this. But something that has always heartened me, especially when I was writing for anti-media, is we would look at these surveys of people's trust in mainstream media. And we would find, well, we didn't find, but the surveys would find that every election year, the distrust increased. So there's already this consciousness, and I know, as Amanda was talking about, there are moments where we do feel hopeless, and it's like, why even try? What's the point? But if you look at the way that people are evolving with this unleashing of the internet, with this incredible access to information and different perspectives, people are getting there. And I just really want to emphasize that because having been banned, dealing with this for the last 9 months, it is so easy to feel like, why bother? But I do remember that there's a much bigger evolution happening beyond the anti-media, beyond just us on the stage. It's decentralized and it's happening all around the world, and it's exciting to see.
So I've attended press conferences under all of the last 4 presidential press secretaries, from Jay Carney Sean Spicer, and now Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I've been in attendance at least one of each of those press secretaries, and none of them have ever called on me. And I don't find the exercise to be enormously useful, right? I think that a lot of it tends to be that the state, the president through a press secretary in that particular case, but it can be through documents, it can be other press releases, whatever it is. A lot of the mainstream media is simply kind of the regurgitation of the state's position, right? So the state says one thing, and then the article says, Trump says blah, 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 or White House says blah, 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 blah. I found that not to be particularly useful. I don't do a ton of just filming politicians doing their politicianing, even though I'm based in DC, and that would be a very easy thing for me to go around doing. On the other hand, I tend to find that the enforcement arm of the state is the police, right? So there's this really big preoccupation with, Trump and the national level of politics and such. But at the end of the day, the way that politics touches you, policy touches you, is via the police. And so a big element of what I do is focus on how the police are treating the situations that I film. 2 weeks ago, I caught a condemnation from my police chief of Washington, D.C., who I had filmed a police officer do something that a lot of news articles, including mainstream news, Yahoo did a story about it. Basically, they offered a fist bump to a member of a far-right group, and that was captured in my live stream, and a lot of news articles were written about it. Some journalists tried to approach the mayor and the police chief about it, and they wouldn't reply. And eventually, a journalist actually found the police chief like on the street, so she was able to confront him, and he couldn't just sort of run away. And he said, I think that the videographer might have been trying to make us look bad because it might have been taken out of context. It was a live stream, folks. So I think that just that act of just showing truth, that act of raw footage is in itself revolutionary. And again, that's where you start with accountability to the way that the state treats people or doesn't treat people.
So I've seen what you're talking about personally firsthand. One massive experience that showed me this was when Luke and I actually kind of infiltrated our way into the G7 in Munich, and I managed to get a press pass by pretending to be the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and they mistakenly gave me that pass.
Did you just say sorry a lot? Like, how did you manage that?
Well, I just said, I've come all this way, of course I have to be on the list, I'm a Canadian, I came from Canada, and they looked at the list and they said, oh wait, CBC, is that you? And I'm like, yep, that's me. So we got in, and the moment we got in, I was blown away by the amount of things that were given to the journalists. They were offering us free food, they were offering us free booze, $1,000 bottles of champagne were on the house. I got a backpack given to me. The footage, the HD, high quality HD footage of the speakers and delegates at G7 was also provided to us. So I had, free food, free bags, all this stuff. Here's the footage. What journalist in that room is going to want to write something negative about the organization or want to criticize it or speak ill about it in any way? They were bought and paid for without even knowing it. And me and Luke are just sitting there looking around going, wow, these guys have completely sold out. And I think most people online are starting to recognize this. They're realizing that they're not getting the truth from the mainstream. They're getting a bunch of posers who are just are doing the bidding of their overlords, and they're looking for alternative sources of information, and that's really where we come in. That's where Press for Truth comes in. We are Change, World Alternative Media, and as I said, I think people are starting to see through the manipulation. We saw it firsthand, and that's where independent media comes in.
We're gonna skip Jeff, but we're gonna go right back to him because as I was sitting here, I'm thinking about the same trip that me and you had in Germany. Jeff Berwick was also there because this was also the same trip that me, Jeff, and Dan got hammered with the White House press corps. And if you know Jeff Berwick, he gets hammered a lot, but this was a whole nother level of hammered, a whole nother level of indecency and craziness.
I think he's here getting hammered.
Yes. Not a surprise. But when me and Dan were there, we're sitting with the top names, the biggest journalists in the game. I don't want to mention exactly who, but and we're sipping, drinking, smoking cigars.
at the freaking Bilderberg Hotel the day before Bilderberg starts, and we're talking. And they pretty much just admitted, like, hey, we're just repeaters. I got a mortgage, I got a wife, I got kids. You guys are doing real journalism. We're just repeating stuff, and good on you. Keep up the great work. But yeah, we're not journalists. You crazy? But that was a moment in time that I was like, holy cow! Like, the whole game is rigged, and it's about all of us knowing it and understanding it. Because when you're watching mainstream media television, you're watching PR for the establishment, and that's exactly what it is.
And I'd seen a lot of this personally as well. Just coming from Canada, they're more out in the open about their control of the media. It's happening obviously in the United States to a great extent, but in Canada they're just basically out in the open about it in a lot of ways. Like, for example, I remember confronting Trudeau a couple years ago, and the reason I confronted him was because I went to a press conference and his media people came up to me and said I could ask one of five questions. You know, I have my own question. I stupidly went along with it. I'm just like, I'll stand at the side of the room, and I ended up having to shout. But anyway, the next day, of course, the media has misrepresented what happened, claimed I was swearing at him in front of children. There were no children around, but that didn't stop every single media, the Associated Press, CBC, Huffington Post, Fox News, CNN, everyone, from copying and pasting the same written article without doing any research. One call from one small town newspaper after that, being the #1 trend on Twitter that day. One call. Everyone else just shared the same article, copied and pasted over and over again. But I mean, to a greater extent, that's not just an issue of one party or another. Obviously, as we know here, this is about, of course, the media is always going to be kind of a mouthpiece for the state, because the media basically supports the idea of the state. So one way or another, whether it's left or right, whether it's center, wherever it is on the collectivist paradigm, they will always support that message. It doesn't matter. So you have a Fox News, you have a CNN. They're both playing people against each other. They're both having, they're part of the bread and circuses, and they're getting people to fight over, which form of poison people should take collectively, which kind of Kool-Aid people should drink. And it gets to this point where you have to step in as an individual and try to break that up, even if it makes you unpopular, because if no one else does it, who will? So I think that there has been a pretty interesting change of the guard over the years. Naturally, whether people realize it or not, naturally people decentralize. Naturally, over time, you see the telegraph office, you have to tell the person at the telegraph office what to write to your friend. They see it, they write it down, very centralized, send it over the airwaves. Well, then there's telegraphs in your home, and you could send it, instead of going to an office, by yourself to that person. And then you go to the telephone, well, you have to talk to the operator and tell them to dial this number, very centralized. Well, technology prevails, and you end up just being able to call people. And the same goes from newspapers owned by William Randolph Hearst, to radio, to television, and to the internet, and from YouTube censoring people to other platforms. So I think that's naturally the way things will work, and they will prevail. I just think it's a matter of just trying to push for that technology, as Avin said earlier in her speech. What are the problems, and what are we doing about those problems? We can complain all day about all the ways that we're being attacked, but there's a lot more to it. What are we doing about it? And not allowing that fear to get to us, not allowing them to cause us to self-censor, etc. So I think that's very important, because one way or another, the media will control the narrative. When was the last time you heard about the Vegas shooting? 5 days after the Vegas shooting, they stopped talking about it on television completely. Biggest mass shooting in American history, other than like Wounded Knee or something like that, which they don't talk about. But, let's just stop talking about it after 5 days. What about North Korea, and then Iran, and then Syria, and whatever they throw in your face? Julian Assange, when was the last time you heard about him? When was the last time you saw one story? The media knows they can control the narrative because they have so much to throw in our face that we forget what they said, and they forget how they manipulated us 5 days after they've done it. It's on to the next sequence. It's like a movie, and it's so surreal when you really start to look at it. It's like, this is a huge story. 5 days later, where is it? Well, they're on to the next. They're on to their next little trick to manipulate the minds of the masses and push people further into dependence, collectivism, and weakness. And I think that's where we need to be vigilant and break free.
Well, I wonder also how much of that is what we're doing as consumers, because I've worked in mainstream media. I was a producer for Fox, a producer for Fox Business, Fox News, working for John Stossel. And I think a lot of what you're saying, it's not as insidious as it may think. Like, John was never censored. John was never dictated to. He was one of the only people on Fox that spoke out about Trump during the election, and he did it like every segment. So he's like this independent voice, I feel, amongst these people who seem to be brainwashed. But I feel that a lot of people are just looking to what consumers want. You know, consumers get us distracted. If you've got nothing new to say about something, then you're probably not going to report on it, because you know people aren't going to click anymore. It's not a big story. So I wonder how much of our habits as consumers is dictating this, you know, let's jump from next topic to next topic and distract them with the new greatest thing. And I wonder what we can do as media producers to change that, or to teach people, you know, dig a little bit more deeply. And I know a lot of the stuff that you guys do does tend to be more investigative. It's not about, like, you know, light fluff and looking over the surface. It's about digging in and finding out the truth of these things. And I wanted to go back to what you were saying before about Canada being more overtly controlled, and definitely the case in Australia. I'm not sure if anyone's been following what's been going on there, but there have been raids by the police of lots of different newspapers and news television stations, and people, you know, journalists being thrown in jail, threatened with jail time for talking about specific stories that they're being censored with. You know, it's a scary state of affairs, and I think in the States it's a little bit different. It's a bit more nuanced, but there's definitely an incentive structure, as you were saying, Luke, you know, about the champagne and the, you know, all of these things that get provided. Oh, you get access to the White House. Don't do anything against us because you'll lose access, CNN. And so it's like, it's just really interesting what's going on. I don't know, Kerry, if you want to start there, or did you want to say something right at the back, Josh?
Yeah, just something real quick. I wanted to mention something I almost forgot. The Canadian government actually bailed out a bunch of medias a few months ago, hundreds of millions of dollars, bailed out the medias they thought were good, basically monopolizing those medias, obviously mainstream and whatever independent medias toe their line. And they just released a digital charter with 10 steps that basically say what's okay to be said in media. They say it's a stop censorship, so now we need to censor people to stop censorship. It's the most crazy backwards thinking, but if you read this charter, it's crazy. They're basically, we need to stop hate speech. There's no definition of hate speech, so basically anyone that is anyway hateful, but we get to decide what's hateful, and therefore we need to go to social medias and ban these people from being able to speak.
This Orwellian double speak, you know, they're redefining definitions. We don't really know what's being said anymore. Carrie, what were you gonna say?
Well, yeah, I think it's really interesting what you talk about whether consumer habits are driving this kind of content. And if you look at history, it's always something to be afraid of, right? It was the Russians, then it was the terrorists, now it's the Russians again, and the terrorists. You know, there's always something for people to be afraid of. I don't know which comes first, but this might seem out of left field, but hang with me for a second. I think that something that really needs to happen is people need to become more emotionally grounded and aware. And this is, what I'm about to say is actually a Buddhist belief, but it's a belief that fear and love are the two basic emotions, and all of the other emotions stem from that. So if you look at how reactive people are, you look at how hateful, you look at how angry, to me that comes down to fear. The more vulnerable emotion underlying that is fear. But if we can help people, and this isn't maybe activism, maybe it's not journalism, maybe it's something I need to make a video about more. But if we can help people find a way to be more at peace internally, to be more loving with themselves and therefore toward others, then these power structures don't have as much influence because the fear does not inspire as much of a response. I know it's a really tall order and it's like a totally different conversation, but I do think it's really important to talk about, because when you look at these people out in the street, like the Ford films, there was that one video outside the White House with like the really reactive anti-Trump person and then the two younger pro-Trump people. They're both so mad, and yet, for me, I look at that and I just see so much suffering underneath that and so much fear, and they're both afraid. Neither of their fears are legitimate. Both sides have, I'm not gonna, it's not fair to discount why they're afraid. They're real feelings, but we need to get to the heart of that and just help people become more at one with themselves, and through that with others, and lose that top-down power structure.
Very much to that same end. I film all kinds of activism, but I end up getting a lot more audience on the stuff that includes violence, sort of unfortunately perhaps. So much so that, when I cover a protest and it's just beginning to end and it's peaceful and someone's talking about, we need to end the wars abroad, and they're just talking about it, or even civil disobedience where people are arrested for protesting kind of in the wrong place, but they're not doing violence. That kind of stuff doesn't get as much attention as when I'm filming kind of the left and the right battling it out on the streets. And so there's been one time that I've been invited onto Fox News to speak on air. And I actually interned there for one semester working on a special report with Brett Baer. But the one time I was invited to speak on air well after I worked at Fox was after filming basically Antifa breaking windows at Berkeley. There was violence and they had sort of briefly threatened me, and so Fox wanted to have me on to sort of talk about that. And while I was on there, they asked, why do you do this? Why do you go out there and film these situations? And what I explained is, people are really focused in the mainstream media on the broken windows, the blood, the punching, and that's what they cut it all down into. And so I said to them, this is awesome that you have me here on Fox, but this is only going to be a few minute segment. And I was out there for like 2.5 hours. And so there's a lot of conversation. And for people to actually understand and dissect the problems that we're having, and if they consider it a goal to alleviate that violence, alleviate that tension that in large part leads to authoritarianism, then they need to actually look at the conversations that are happening. Why are these people punching each other? What do they believe? And the media largely doesn't want to actually talk to people. They don't want to show what people are actually saying. They just want to say, look, the left and the right are punching each other, and it's violence, and it's because of Trump, right? And they make it be very, very simple. And I think that narrative is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think that they create greater division by only showing those things.